Lesson 3.
Changing ways of life.
The big idea.
Americans experienced cultural conflicts as customs and values changed in the 1920s.
Why it matters now.
The way in which different groups react to change continues to cause conflict today.
One American's story.
As the 1920s dawned, social reformers who hoped to ban alcohol and the evils associated with it rejoiced. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, banning the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcohol, took effect in January 1920. Billy Sunday, an evangelist who preached against the evils of drinking, predicted a new age of virtue.
The reign of tears is over. The slums will soon be only a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now. Women will smile and the children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent.
Billy Sunday, quoted in How Dry We Were, Prohibition Revisited. 1920s evangelist, Billy Sunday. Sunday's dream was not to be realized in the 1920s, as the law proved unenforceable. The failure of prohibition was a sign of cultural conflicts, most evident in the nation's cities. Lured by jobs and by the challenge and freedom that the city represented, millions of people rode excitedly out of America's rural past and into its urban future. Rural and urban differences. America changed dramatically in the years before 1920, as was revealed in the 1920 census. According to figures that year, 51.2% of Americans lived in communities with populations of 2,500 to more than 1 million. Between 1922 and 1929, migration to the cities accelerated, with nearly 2 million people leaving farms and towns each year. Cities were the place to be, not to get away from, said one historian. The agricultural world that millions of Americans left behind was largely unchanged from the 19th century. It was a world of small towns and farms bound together by conservative moral values and close social relationships. Yet, small-town attitudes began to lose their hold on the American mind as the city rose to prominence. Cars and pedestrians crowd the streets of New York City on Easter Sunday, 1920. The new urban scene. At the beginning of the 1920s, New York, with a population of 5.6 million people, topped the list of big cities. Next came Chicago, with nearly 3 million, and Philadelphia, with nearly 2 million. Another 65 cities claimed populations of 100,000 or more, and they grew more crowded by the day. Life in these booming cities was far different from the slow-paced, intimate life in America's small towns. Chicago, for instance, was an industrial powerhouse. It was home to native-born whites and African Americans, immigrant Poles, Irish, Russians, Italians, Swedes, Arabs, French, and Chinese. Each day, an estimated 300,000 workers, 150,000 cars and buses, and 3,000 streetcars filled the pulsing downtown. At night, people crowded into ornate movie theaters and vaudeville houses offering live variety shows. For small-town migrants, adapting to the urban environment demanded changes in thinking as well as in everyday living. The city was a world of competition and change. City dwellers read and argued about current scientific and social ideas. They judged one another by accomplishment more often than by background. City dwellers also tolerated drinking, gambling, and casual dating. These worldly behaviors were considered shocking and sinful in small towns. For all its color and challenge, though, the city could be impersonal and frightening. Streets were filled with strangers, not friends and neighbors. Life was fast-paced, not leisurely.
It is not for nothing that the predominating color of Chicago is orange. It is as if the city, in its taxicabs, in its shop fronts, in the wrappings of its parcels, chose the color of flame that goes with the smoky black of its factories. It is not for nothing that it has repelled the geometric street arrangement of New York and substituted great ways with names that a stranger must learn if he can. He is in a crowded city, and if he has business there, he tells himself, "If I weaken, I shan't last long."
Walter L. George, quoted in Hail Columbia, "In the city, lonely migrants from the country often ached for home." Throughout the 1920s, Americans found themselves caught between rural and urban cultures. It was a tug that pitted what seemed to be a safe small-town world of close ties, hard work, and strict morals against a big city world of anonymous crowds, moneymakers, and pleasure seekers. This tension between traditional rural attitudes and modern urban lifestyles was both a reflection of and a reaction to changes in American society during the 1920s. The conflict would be expressed in several ways. The Prohibition experiment. One vigorous clash between small-town and big-city Americans began in earnest in January 1920, when the 18th Amendment went into effect. This amendment launched the era known as Prohibition, during which the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages were legally prohibited. Reformers had long considered liquor a prime cause of corruption. They thought that too much drinking led to crime, wife and child abuse, accidents on the job, and other serious social problems. Support for prohibition came largely from the rural South and West, areas with large populations of native-born Protestants. The church-affiliated Anti-Saloon League had led the drive to pass the Prohibition Amendment. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, which considered drinking a sin, had helped push the measure through. At first, saloons closed their doors, and arrests for drunkenness declined. But in the aftermath of World War I, many Americans were tired of making sacrifices. They wanted to enjoy life. Most immigrant groups did not consider drinking a sin, but a natural part of socializing, and they resented government meddling. Eventually, the government sealed Prohibition's fate when it failed to budget enough money to enforce the law. The Volstead Act established a Prohibition Bureau in the Treasury Department in 1919, but the agency was underfunded. The job of enforcement involved patrolling 18,700 miles of coastline, as well as inland borders, tracking down illegal stills, equipment for distilling liquor, monitoring highways for truckloads of illegal alcohol, and overseeing all the industries that legally used alcohol to be sure none was siphoned off for illegal purposes. The task fell to approximately 1,500 poorly paid federal agents and local police. It was clearly an impossible job. Speakeasies and bootleggers. To obtain liquor illegally, drinkers went underground to hidden saloons and nightclubs known as speakeasies. So called because when inside, one spoke quietly or easily to avoid detection. Speakeasies could be found everywhere, in penthouses, cellars, rooming houses, office buildings, tenements, hardware stores, and tea rooms. To be admitted to a speakeasy, one had to present a card or use a password. Inside, one would find a mix of fashionable middle-class and upper-middle-class men and women. A young woman demonstrates one of the means used to conceal alcohol, hiding it in containers strapped to one's legs. Before long, people grew bolder in getting around the law. They learned to distill alcohol and built their own stills. Since alcohol was allowed for medicinal and religious purposes, prescriptions for alcohol and sales of sacramental wine, intended for church services, skyrocketed. People also bought liquor from bootleggers, named for a smuggler's practice of carrying liquor in the legs of boots. Bootleggers smuggled alcohol in from Canada, Cuba, and the West Indies. The business of evading the law and making a mock of it has ceased to wear any aspects of crime. and has become a sort of national sport, wrote the journalist H.L. Mencken. Organized crime. Prohibition had a devastating unintended consequence. Not only did prohibition generate disrespect for the law, it also contributed to organized crime in nearly every major city. Chicago became notorious as the home of Al Capone, a gangster whose bootlegging empire netted over $60 million a year. Capone took control of the Chicago liquor business by killing off his competition. During the 1920s, headlines reported 522 bloody gang killings and made the image of flashy Al Capone part of the folklore of the period. Document-based investigation, historical source. By the mid-1920s, only 19% of Americans supported prohibition. The rest wanted the amendment changed or repealed. They believed that prohibition caused worse effects than the initial problem. Rural Protestant Americans, however, defended a law that they felt strengthened moral values. The 18th Amendment remained in force until 1933, when it was repealed by the 21st Amendment. Prohibition, 1920 to 1933. The 18th Amendment had unintended consequences. Science and religion clash. Another bitter controversy highlighted the growing rift between traditional and modern ideas during the 1920s. This battle raged between fundamentalist religious groups and secular thinkers over the validity of certain scientific discoveries. American fundamentalism. The Protestant Christian movement, grounded in a literal or non-symbolic interpretation of the Bible, was known as fundamentalism. Fundamentalists were skeptical of some scientific discoveries and theories. They argued that all important knowledge could be found in the Bible. They believed that the Bible was inspired by God, and that therefore its stories in all their details were true. Their beliefs led fundamentalists to reject the theory of evolution, advanced by Charles Darwin in the 19th century. This theory states that species of plants and animals descended from common ancestors. The implication they found most objectionable was that humans were related to apes. They pointed instead to the Bible's account of creation, in which God made the world and all life forms, including humans, in 6 days. The evangelist Aimee Semple McPherson in 1922. Fundamentalism expressed itself in several ways. In the South and West, preachers led religious revivals based on the authority of the scriptures. One of the most powerful revivalists was Billy Sunday, a baseball player turned preacher who staged emotional meetings across the South. In Los Angeles, Aimee Semple McPherson used Hollywood showmanship to preach the word to homesick Midwestern migrants and devoted followers of her radio broadcasts. In the 1920s, fundamentalism gained followers who began to call for laws prohibiting the teaching of evolution. The Scopes Trial. In March 1925, Tennessee passed the nation's first law that made it a crime to teach evolution. Immediately, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, promised to defend any teacher who would challenge the law. John T. Scopes, a young biology teacher in Dayton, Tennessee, accepted the challenge. In his biology class, Scopes read this passage from Civic Biology. "We have now learned that animal forms may be arranged so as to begin with the simple one-celled forms and culminate with a group which includes man himself." Scopes was promptly arrested, and his trial was set for July. The ACLU hired Clarence Darrow, the most famous trial lawyer of the day, to defend Scopes. William Jennings Bryan, three-time Democratic candidate for president and a devout fundamentalist, served as a special prosecutor. There was no real question of guilt or innocence. Scopes was honest about his action. The Scopes trial was a fight over evolution and the role of science and religion in public schools and in American society. A 1925 newspaper cartoon portrays Brian, left, and Darrow, right, at the close of the Scopes monkey trial on the teaching of evolution. So called because of the theory of evolution that states humans were related to apes. The trial opened on July 10, 1925, and almost overnight became a national sensation. Darrow called on Brian to testify as an expert on the Bible, the contest that everyone had been waiting for. To handle the throngs of Brian's supporters, Judge Ralston moved the court outside to a platform built under the maple trees. There, before a crowd of several thousand people, Darrow relentlessly questioned Brian about his beliefs. He asked Brian if he agreed with Bishop James Ussher's 17th century calculation that, according to the Bible, creation happened in 4004 BC. Had every living thing on Earth appeared since that time? Did Brian know that ancient civilizations had thrived before 4004 BC? Did he know the age of the Earth? Brian grew edgy but stuck to his guns. Finally, Darrow asked Brian, "Do you think the Earth was made in 6 days?" Brian answered, "Not 6 days of 24 hours." People sitting on the lawn gasped. With this answer, Brian admitted that the Bible might be interpreted in different ways. But in spite of this admission, Scopes was found guilty and fined $100. The Tennessee Supreme Court later changed the verdict based on a technicality, but the law outlawing the teaching of evolution remained in effect. To this day, teaching evolution remains controversial in some communities. This clash over evolution, the Prohibition experiment, and the emerging urban scene all were evidence of the changes and conflicts occurring during the 1920s. During that period, women also experienced conflict as they redefined their roles and pursued new lifestyles.